The American West of the 1870s was a crucible. It didn't forge character. It revealed it in its rawest form. For 16-year-old Alice Finch, the vast, sun-scorched plains of the Colorado Territory were about to reveal a truth more brutal than any winter storm. Her world, already fractured by loss, was about to be shattered by the one man sworn to protect her. This isn't just a tale of survival against the elements. It's the story of a girl abandoned to the buzzards and the dust, left with nothing but a broken heart and a horizon that promised only death, until an encounter she was taught to fear became her only salvation. The silence was the first thing that became a sound. It was a low hum that vibrated from the baked earth through the splintered floorboards of the wagon and up into Alice's bones. It was the sound of emptiness, a vast and terrifying hymn sung by a land that didn't care if you lived or died. For 3 days, their wagon had been a wounded beast, its rear axle snapped clean by a rock that had seemed to leap from the ruts in the trail. The mule Jeremiah had given up that morning, its final breath a soft, dusty sigh that was immediately stolen by the ceaseless wind. Now only she and her father, Jedediah Finch, remained. "It's no good, Abby." He rasped his voice, a gravelly echo of the man he once was. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, a shimmering, indistinct line where the pale blue sky met the endless ochre of the plains. A bottle of rye whiskey, nearly empty, dangled from his right hand like a sixth finger. "We can walk, Pa Alice," said her own voice, thin and cracked. Her tongue felt thick in her mouth, a piece of dry leather. The map said, "Stone Creek can't be more than 2 days' walk from here. If we leave now, travel at night." Jedediah let out a hollow laugh that turned into a hacking cough. He was a scarecrow of a man, his frame whittled down by grief and cheap liquor. The loss of his wife Martha to the fever 2 winters ago had hollowed him out, and the whiskey had been steadily pouring into the void ever since. The gold claim in the Rockies that had been their dream had become his obsession, a frantic chase to outrun a memory he couldn't shake. 2 days he sneered, finally turning to look at her. His eyes, once the color of a clear summer sky, were now a web of red veins. 2 days for you, maybe. You're young. You've still got the grit of your mother in you. He took a long, gurgling pull from the bottle. Me. This land's already got its teeth in me. It's just chewing slow. He stumbled as he rose, kicking at the broken wheel with a sudden venomous fury. Damned this whole cursed land. Damned it all. Alice flinched. She was used to his drunken rages, his fits of despair that crashed through their small world like thunderstorms. But this was different. This was the quiet, chilling finality of a man giving up. "Don't say that, Pa. We're a team. You and me. We'll get through this, just like we always do." She tried to inject a strength into her words that she didn't feel. Her own hope was a flickering candle flame, and his breath was a gale-force wind threatening to extinguish it. He stood over her, his shadow falling across her small, sunburnt face. He looked at her for a long moment, and for a fleeting second, a glimmer of the father, she remembered the one who taught her the constellations and how to whittle a bird from a piece of scrap wood surfaced in his bloodshot eyes. It was a look of such profound, gut-wrenching pain that it stole her breath. Then it was gone, replaced by a mask of cold resolve. "There's half a canteen of water left," he said, his voice flat, "and a handful of hardtack in the sack. It'll last you a day, maybe a day and a half, if you're smart about it." A cold dread, colder than any mountain snow, began to seep into Alice's heart. "What are you talking about?" "Our water. Our hardtack." He untied the canteen from his belt and set it on the wagon bed beside her. He then took the heavy Colt revolver from his holster and placed it next to the canteen. It was her mother's gun, smaller and more ornate than his own peacemaker. It's got 3 rounds left. Don't use it on no coyote. You save it. You understand me? You save it for the real trouble. Or for yourself, if it comes to that. The world tilted. The humming silence became a deafening roar in her ears. Pano. No, you're not making any sense. Where are you going? I'm going to walk, he said, not looking at her. He picked up his rifle and the near-empty whiskey bottle. I'm a Jonah girl. A curse. Everything I touch turns to dust. Your mother. This claim. This wagon. I brought this on us. On you. He took a step away from the wagon, then another. P.I. Her voice was a shriek, a raw, desperate tear in the fabric of the silence. Jedediah, don't you do this, don't you leave me. He stopped his back to her. A man I met in dusty old Wichita once told me the Cheyenne believe some men are ghost walkers. They're already dead, they just ain't laid down yet. That's me, Abby. I'm a ghost walker. And I ain't dragging you down into the dirt with me. You're my father. She sobbed, scrambling out of the wagon, her bare feet stinging on the hot, sharp ground. You can't, you just can't. He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see the profile of his haggard face against the immense, indifferent sky. Your mother was the strong one. Be like her. Survive this. And then he started walking. He didn't look back. He just walked east into the shimmering heat haze, a lonely, broken figure shrinking with every step. Alice screamed his name until her throat was raw, the words swallowed by the vastness. She pleaded, she cursed, she begged God and the devil and anyone who might be listening in the suffocating emptiness. But Jedediah Finch just kept walking a ghost, returning to the dust until the horizon took him completely. Alice stood there, the sun beating down on her head, her cries turning to ragged, hopeless sobs. She was alone, utterly, completely alone. The weight of the sky pressed down on her, and for the first time in her life, she understood the true meaning of despair. The first day was a blur of disbelief and scorching sun. Alice stayed by the wagon, a monument to her shattered world, convinced her father would come back. Every shimmer on the horizon was his returning figure. Every gust of wind was the sound of his footsteps. He'd sober up, realize the monstrous thing he had done, and come back for her. He had to. But as the sun bled across the western sky, painting the clouds in violent strokes of orange and purple, the truth began to settle in her stomach like a cold stone. He was gone. The night brought a different kind of terror. The temperature plummeted, and the landscape, once a monotonous brown, became a theater of shifting shadows and imagined threats. The yip and howl of coyotes sounded impossibly close, a hungry choir in the darkness. She clutched the cold steel of her mother's Colt, its weight a poor substitute for the presence of another human being. She drank only a sip of water, the metallic taste a stark reminder of how little she had. Sleep came in brief, fitful bursts, punctuated by nightmares of her father's receding back. The second-day thirst became her tormentor. Her lips cracked and bled. Her head pounded with a dull, persistent rhythm. The world seemed to swim in and out of focus. She knew she had to move. To stay was to die. Using the sun as her guide, she started walking west towards the distant hazy promise of the Rocky Mountains and the town of Stone Creek. Each step was an agony. The hard, unforgiving ground bruised the soles of her feet. The sun was a physical weight on her shoulders. She stumbled often, her vision blurring, the landscape warping into grotesque shapes. Sometime in the afternoon, she saw it, or thought she saw it. A figure on horseback watching her from a low ridge. It was too far to make out details, but it wasn't her father. It was lean still, and seemed to blend with the earth itself. An Indian. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of her dehydration. Her father's stories, campfire tales from other prospectors, came rushing back, stories of raids, of scalps of a savage, merciless people. She fumbled for the Colt, her hand shaking so violently she could barely grasp the handle. When she looked up again, the figure was gone. Was it a hallucination? A mirage born of sun and despair? By the third morning, her world had shrunk to a few desperate realities, the burning in her throat, the leaden weight of her legs, and the last sloshing mouthful of water in the canteen. She drained it, the lukewarm liquid, doing little to quench the fire inside her. An hour later, her legs buckled. She fell to her knees, the sharp pebbles digging into her skin. She tried to rise, but her body refused. This was it. The land had won. She laid her head on the hot dust, the smell of dry earth filling her nostrils. Her last conscious thought was of her mother's face, smiling in a field of prairie flowers. She awoke to a shadow falling over her. She blinked, her vision a watery mess. A figure knelt beside her. The silhouette was the same one from the ridge. He was real, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the end. He was here to finish her. But he made no move to harm her. He simply watched her, his face, impassive, carved from bronze and shadow. He was Cheyenne, she guessed, from the beadwork on his leather vest and the way his long black hair was braided. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his early 20s, with high cheekbones and eyes so dark they seemed to hold the emptiness of the night sky. There were 2 white streaks of paint drawn from his temples back towards his ears. He said something in a low, guttural language she didn't understand. Seeing the terror in her eyes, he fell silent. Slowly, as if not to startle a wild animal, he reached for a water skin tied to his hip. He uncorked it and held it out to her. Alice stared at it, her mind a war of instinct and ingrained prejudice. To accept was to trust, to refuse was to die. Her body made the choice for her. With a surge of desperate energy, she lunged for it, grabbing the skin with both hands and bringing it to her lips. The water was cool and sweet, the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. She drank too much too fast and choked water spilling down her chin and onto her dusty dress. The warrior waited patiently. When she was done, he offered her a small piece of dried meat. It was tough and smoky, but it was food, and it sent a jolt of life through her exhausted body. He watched her, his expression unreadable. He gestured to the east, then made a walking motion with his fingers, a questioning look in his eyes. She understood. Where did you come from? Tears welled in her eyes. She pointed east, then made a shape of a man with her hands, then mimicked him, walking away, her gesture becoming smaller and smaller. Finally she shook her head, a sob escaping her lips. He left me. The warrior's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. He looked at her, truly, looked at her, and saw not just a white girl, an intruder, but a child abandoned, and at the edge of death. He stood and walked to his horse, a powerful paint pony that had been standing silently nearby. He returned with a blanket. He spoke again, his voice softer this time. He pointed to her, then to his horse, then to the west. I will take you. Alice hesitated. Everything she had ever been told screamed at her to run, to fight, to never trust a savage. But as she looked into his dark, steady eyes, she saw no malice. She saw something else, something quiet and solemn. It wasn't pity. It was a kind of recognition, as if he understood suffering in a way her own people did not. With the last of her strength, she nodded. He helped her to her feet, his touch gentle but firm. She was surprised by his strength as he lifted her easily onto the back of his horse, settling her in front of him. He wrapped the blanket around her trembling shoulders. As he mounted behind her, the warmth of his body was a startling comfort against the chill that had settled deep in her bones. He clicked his tongue, and the pony began to move its gait, smooth and steady. Alice leaned back against the warrior, too weak to hold herself up. The world swam around her as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the vast, endless plains stretching out before them. But for the first time, she did not feel alone in their oppressive emptiness. She was being carried toward an unknown future by a man whose name she didn't know, a silent warrior who had appeared like a whisper from the dust. Waking up was a slow, confusing process. Alice was no longer under the oppressive glare of the sun, but in the soft, diffused light of an enclosed space. The air smelled of wood smoke leather and something else, a clean herbal scent like crushed sage. She was lying on a bed of soft buffalo robes, a light blanket covering her. She sat up, her head spinning slightly, and looked around. She was inside a teepee. The conical walls of taut hide glowed with the afternoon light painted on the inside with figures of horses and buffalo. A small smokeless fire pit glowed in the center, a thin tendril of smoke rising to the opening at the peak. The flap of the tipi opened, and an old woman entered. Her face was a beautiful map of wrinkles, her white hair tied back in two neat braids. She wore a simple doeskin dress and carried a wooden bowl that steamed gently. She saw Alice was awake, and her lips curved into a warm, nearly toothless smile. She said something in the same Cheyenne tongue as the warrior, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. Alice could only stare, her fear returning. The woman seemed to understand. She set the bowl down and backed away, giving Alice space. She pointed to the bowl, then to Alice's mouth, a clear invitation. Hesitantly, Alice reached for it. It was a thin broth, warm and savory, with bits of tender meat and wild vegetables. She ate slowly at first, then with a ravenous hunger that surprised her. It was the best meal she had ever had. This became her routine for the next few days. The old woman whom she came to know as Meha, which meant river woman, cared for her with a gentle, unspoken kindness. She would bring food, fresh water, and a poultice of crushed leaves for Alice's sunburnt skin and bruised feet. She never pushed, never crowded, simply provided. The warrior who had saved her, she learned, was named Nokose, which meant bear. He was Meha's grandson, though his own parents were gone. He would appear at the entrance of the teepee once a day, a silent inquiry in his eyes. Alice would nod to show she was well, and he would nod back before disappearing again. He was a figure of respect and some mystery in the small camp. The other members of his band, a few families who traveled together, would watch her with a mixture of curiosity and deep suspicion. She was an outsider, a ghost from the white world that had brought them so much pain. As her strength returned, Alice began to step outside the teepee. The camp was nestled in a hidden valley, a slash of green with a clear stream running through it. It was a world away from the barren plains. She watched the women tan hides their hands, working with an ancient practiced skill. She saw the children playing games with stones and bones, their laughter, a universal language. Meha began to teach her. Not with words at first, but with actions. She showed Alice how to grind corn into meal with a smooth stone, how to find the sweet edible roots that grew by the stream, how to strip willow branches, and weave them into sturdy baskets. Language came slowly, a word at a time. Hoesta for fire, Maheoo for the Great Spirit, Veta for water. Alice was a quick learner, her young mind eager for something to focus on besides her own grief. Through Meha's patient teachings and the fragmented conversations she started to have, Alice began to piece together Nokosi's story. He was not a chief or a great war leader, but a man set apart by sorrow. A few years prior, a group of white buffalo hunters, operating under the protection of a powerful man from the railroad, had broken a treaty and come on to Cheyenne hunting grounds. They hadn't just been after hides. In a drunken sport, they had attacked a small, peaceful hunting party. Nokosi's wife and young son had been among the dead. Nokosi had been away on a vision quest at the time, seeking guidance from the spirits. He returned to find his world destroyed. Since that day, he had been consumed by two purposes: caring for his grandmother Meha and hunting the man who led the massacre. The white streaks of paint he wore were not for war, but for mourning. They would remain until he had found justice for his family. This knowledge changed how Alice saw him. His silence wasn't aloofness, it was a heavy blanket of grief. His solitary nature wasn't a choice, it was a cage built of loss. She realized that the chasm of pain that separated her from her old life was something he understood completely. One evening as the sun set, Nokose found her sitting by the stream, skipping stones across its surface. He sat not beside her, but a respectful distance away. For a long time they were silent, listening to the burble of the water and the chirping of crickets. "You learn fast," he said, his English, slow and deliberate, pieced together from encounters with traders and soldiers. Alice was startled. She hadn't known he could speak her language. "Meha is a good teacher. She has a strong heart," he said, looking at the water. "She sees the spirit, not the skin." He paused. "The man. Your father. Why he leave you?" The question was direct, yet spoken without judgment. Alice swallowed the lump of grief that was always in her throat, swelling again. He lost my mother. And then he lost himself. He said he was a curse." Nokose nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "A man can be haunted. The ghosts of those he loved can walk behind him, make him do things his spirit does not want. He wasn't always like that," she whispered more to herself than to him. "Before he was good, he was strong. The white man's whiskey is a bad spirit," Nokose said. "It steals a man's soul and leaves an empty vessel." He picked up a perfectly flat grey stone. "Sometimes a man is not lost. He is just broken, and he does not know how to be fixed." In his words, she heard not just an observation about her father, but a reflection of his own shattered world. They were two broken people from different worlds, sitting by a stream, as darkness fell bound by a shared language of loss. In that moment, the wall of fear and mistrust that had separated them crumbled, replaced by the first tentative foundation of an unlikely understanding. Alice Finch, the abandoned girl from a broken-down wagon, was becoming someone else, someone forged in the fire of tragedy and cooled in the waters of this strange new world. While Alice was learning the Cheyenne way, Jedediah Finch was stumbling through his own personal hell. He had walked for 2 days, fueled by whiskey and a self-loathing so profound it was a physical force. He didn't care about the sun, the thirst, or the predators in the night. He courted death, willed it to take him, but the uncaring land refused to grant him his wish. On the 3rd day, a freight wagon driver named Gus found him collapsed on the trail, half dead from dehydration, and muttering his daughter's name. Gus, a grizzled man with a pragmatic view of humanity, assumed him to be another failed prospector and hauled him into the back of his wagon like a sack of grain. He dumped him unceremoniously on the dusty main street of Stone Creek. Stone Creek wasn't much of a town. It was a raw, chaotic collection of clapboard buildings, a temporary scar on the landscape that served the prospectors heading into the mountains and the cattle drives passing through. It had a saloon, a general store, a blacksmith, and a sheriff's office. It was to the sheriff's office that Jedediah, after begging a few swigs of water from a horse trough, finally staggered. Sheriff Brody was a man who looked like he had been carved from the same stubborn rock as the nearby mountains. He was past 50, with a walrus mustache and weary, intelligent eyes that had seen every kind of trouble the frontier could cook up. He was sitting at his desk, meticulously cleaning his rifle, when Jedediah stumbled in, looking like a wraith. Sheriff Jedediah croaked, collapsing into a chair. I need to confess a crime." Brody looked up slowly, his expression unchanging. "Drunk and disorderly. Cheating at cards, stealing a horse. Worse." Jedediah whispered, his head in his hands. "Much worse. I killed my own daughter." The sheriff stopped his cleaning. He looked at the broken man in front of him, smelling the stale whiskey and the stench of pure despair. He'd seen men like this before, men shattered by this unforgiving land. "Start from the beginning," Brody said, his voice calm and even, "and don't leave anything out." The story poured out of Jedediah in a torrent of guilt and grief. He told Brody about his wife Martha, about the failed claim, the broken wagon, and the final terrible act of abandonment. He painted himself as a monster, a man who had willingly left his own child to die on the plains. When he was finished, he was sobbing a broken, wretched sound in the quiet office. Sheriff Brody listened without interruption. When Jedediah fell silent, Brody didn't reach for his handcuffs. Instead, he got up, poured a dipper of water from a bucket, and set it in front of Jedediah. "Drink," he said. Jedediah obeyed numbly. "You say your claim was up near the Black Fork?" Brody asked. Jedediah nodded. "Was supposed to be rich. All lies. Who sold you the claim map and the supplies? A man. An agent for the Transcontinental Railroad. Said they were selling off excess parcels. Name of Silas Kane." Brody's eyes narrowed. "Kane. I know the name. He's been in town for a few weeks, operating out of the saloon, buying up claims from discouraged miners for pennies on the dollar. Says the railroad needs the right-of-way. He's a vulture," Jedediah spat. "He sold me a worthless plot and gear that was falling apart." Sheriff Brody leaned forward, his voice low. Finch, a man who truly wanted his daughter dead, wouldn't walk into a sheriff's office and confess it. He'd just disappear. "Something's missing from your story. You didn't just leave her because you were drunk and hopeless. What aren't you telling me?" Jedediah looked up, his eyes wide, with a fresh wave of horror. He hadn't told the whole truth because he was ashamed, because it made him not just a monster, but a coward. The night before the axle broke, Jedediah began, his voice trembling. "Kane and 2 of his men rode out to our camp. He'd heard a rumor that I'd actually found a color seam, a real one, not on the plot he sold me, but nearby. It was true. I'd found a small one, enough to get us started again." He paused, taking a ragged breath. "Kane wanted it. He said it was on railroad land, and I was a trespasser. I told him to go to hell. Then he put his gun to Alice's head. The memory made him choke. He said I could have a choice. I could sign the claim over to him and walk away, or I could watch him pull the trigger. But he added a twist. He said if I ever told anyone, or if he saw my face or Alice's in any town within 100 miles, he'd send his men to finish the job. He wanted us gone, erased. "So you signed it over," Brody stated. "I signed it," Jedediah whispered. "The next day the axle broke. It felt like a sign, the devil's own luck. I was drunk, Sheriff, out of my mind with fear and shame. I looked at Abby and all I could see was Cain's gun at her temple. I thought, in my twisted, drunken mind, I thought if she wasn't with me, if she was just gone, then Cain's threat would be gone too. I thought leaving her to the wild was a kinder fate than what he and his men would do to her. I thought I was saving her." He looked at the sheriff, his face a mask of agony. "It wasn't a mercy. It was madness. I left her to die because I was a coward." Sheriff Brody was silent for a long time. He had seen the evil men like Silas Cain were capable of. He was a snake, preying on the desperate and using the railroad's name as both a shield and a weapon. "You're not a murderer," Finch Brody said, finally his voice firm. "You're a fool who was pushed to the brink by a wicked man. But you've got a chance to make it right." "She's gone," Jedediah moaned. "It's been days. No one could survive out there." "This land is full of surprises," Brody replied, standing up and buckling on his gun belt. "First things first, you're going to sober up. I'm locking you in a cell with a bucket of water and a Bible. No whiskey. Tomorrow, you're going to write down every single thing Cain said and did. Every threat. Every detail." "And what are you going to do?" Jedediah asked, a tiny, fragile spark of hope igniting in his chest. "I'm going to have a little talk with Mr. Silas Cain, Sheriff Brody," said his eyes as hard as granite. "And I'm going to organize a search party. We're going to find your daughter." But Brody knew, and Jedediah feared that after so much time, a search party would likely only be looking for a grave. The days in the Cheyenne camp bled into weeks. Alice's skin darkened under the sun, and her body, once soft and accustomed to town life, grew lean and strong. The Cheyenne language no longer sounded like a jumble of foreign noises. She could follow conversations, could speak in simple sentences, could share jokes with the children. She learned to read the land, to know which clouds carried rain and which were empty promises, to identify the tracks of deer and antelope. Her relationship with Nokose deepened not in words but in shared actions. He began taking her with him on his hunts not for big game, but for rabbits and prairie fowl. It was his way of teaching her the final, most important lessons of survival. He taught her how to move silently through the tall grass, how to read the bend of a branch or the disturbance of a stone. He showed her how to craft a simple but effective snare, and how to aim and fire a bow he had made for her, its pull strength matched to her own. Her first successful shot, a clean hit on a grouse from 20 yards, filled her with a surge of pride and self-reliance she had never known. "You have a good eye," he'd commented, his rare praise, warming her more than the sun. "You see the target. You do not see the distractions." During these long, quiet hours in the wilderness, he began to speak of his past. He described his wife, Mourning Dove, not with sorrow, but with a vibrant love that made her seem alive. He spoke of her laughter, of the way she could soothe a crying child with a simple song. He spoke of his son, Little Hawk, a boy with a boundless curiosity and a love for chasing butterflies. One afternoon, while they rested in the shade of a cottonwood tree, he finally told her about the man he hunted. "His name is Cain Nokose," said his voice, low and hard. "He is not a soldier. He is a man who hides behind the iron horse. He led the hunters. I saw him from a ridge too late to stop it." He laughed as my people fell. Alice froze, the name hitting her like a physical blow. Cain, Silas Cain. Nokose turned to her, his dark eyes boring into hers, surprised that she knew the name. "You know this man." Alice's blood ran cold. The pieces of the puzzle scattered across the plains, suddenly slammed together in her mind. The man who had destroyed Nokos's family was the same man who had terrorized hers. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a dark thread of fate that tied them all together. He's the reason my father. She explained everything. The worthless claim, the discovery of the real gold seam, the threat against her life at gunpoint. As she spoke, Nokos's expression hardened into a mask of cold fury. He uses fear as his weapon, Nokosi said, his hand clenching into a fist. He turns your people against each other with greed, and he kills my people for sport. He is a poison in the land. Alice looked at Nokose, at the mourning paint on his face, at the simmering rage in his eyes. She saw his vow of vengeance, but she also saw something else. If Cain was in Stone Creek, as he surely was, then her father was in unimaginable danger. Jedediah, broken and alone, might try to confront him. He might already be dead. A new resolve hardened within her. She was no longer the helpless girl left by the wagon. She was a survivor. Meha had taught her resilience. Nokose had taught her strength. The plains had taught her that to wait was to perish. I have to go to Stone Creek, she said, her voice clear and steady. I have to find my father. I have to face Cain. Nokose studied her, his gaze intense. This is not your fight. This is my vow. He made it my fight when he put a gun to my head, she retorted, a fire in her eyes he had never seen before. He made it my fight when he broke my father and left him a ghost. Your vow is for vengeance, Nokose. Mine is for my family. We are hunting the same man, but for different reasons. He saw the truth in her words. He also saw the immense danger. Cain was not a man to be trifled with. He would have hired guns, and the town would be his territory. For a Cheyenne warrior to walk into a white settlement was risky enough. To do so while hunting a powerful white man was a death sentence. And to bring Alice with him. It is a dangerous path, he said, his voice a low warning. I died once already out on those plains, Alice replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. I am not afraid of dying again. But I am terrified of living as a coward, hiding while the man who ruined my life walks free. Nokose saw the iron in her spine, the same unyielding spirit he had loved in his wife Mourning Dove. It was the spirit of a warrior. His vow had been a solitary one, a lonely path of vengeance. But now that path had converged with hers. Protecting her had become as important as avenging his family. The two vows were now a single two-edged blade. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. We will go. We will go to Stone Creek. But we go my way. We will be shadows, not thunder. And when we find this Cain, we will see that the land itself brings him justice. The decision was made. They would leave the sanctuary of the valley and walk back into the world that had cast them both out their separate quests for redemption and revenge, now intertwined, leading them to a violent reckoning in the dusty streets of Stone Creek. The journey to Stone Creek was a reversal of the one that had brought her to the Cheyenne. This time, Alice was not a helpless passenger, but an active participant. They traveled light and fast on foot, using the terrain to their advantage. Nokose moved with the fluid grace of a predator, and Alice, to her own surprise, kept pace. She applied the lessons he had taught her, her eyes scanning the ground for tracks, her ears attuned to the slightest sound. They moved mostly at dawn and dusk, avoiding the heat of the day and the prying eyes of any travelers. They spoke little, their communication efficient and born of a deep mutual understanding. Nokose showed her how to use a ravine for cover, how to find water by following the flight of certain birds, how to build a small, smokeless fire in a pit that would be invisible from a distance. One evening, As they shared a meal of roasted rabbit, Alice found herself studying Nokosi's face in the firelight. The lines of grief were still there, but she saw something else now, too, a fierce, protective focus. "Are you afraid?" she asked quietly. He looked up from sharpening his knife. "Fear is a warning. It tells the deer the wolf is near. It tells the warrior his enemy is strong. Only a fool feels no fear. A wise man listens to it." He tested the blade with his thumb. "I do not fear Cain. I fear what he can turn other men into. I fear the poison he spreads. And I fear for you. You don't have to," she said. "You saved my life. You don't owe me anything more. This is not about debt." He replied, his gaze steady. "When I found you, I saw another victim of the world that took my family. Helping you, it was a way to fight the darkness that swallowed them. Now you are my sister in this hunt. A warrior does not abandon another warrior on the trail." His words settled deep inside her, mending a part of her heart she thought had been permanently broken. She was not Alice Finch, the drunkard's abandoned daughter. She was a warrior on the trail. As they drew closer to Stone Creek, the signs of the white man's world became more frequent. They found the discarded rubbish of a campsite, deep wagon ruts that scarred the earth, and the distant, mournful sound of a train whistle. For Nokose, these were signs of a spreading sickness. For Alice, they were a painful reminder of the life she had lost. They scouted the town from a high bluff for an entire day, watching the comings and goings. Stone Creek was even uglier up close, a haphazard collection of buildings, teeming with rough, loud men. Nokose pointed out the saloon. Men with guns on their hips swaggered in and out constantly. "Cain will be there," he stated. "A spider feels safest in the center of his web." He laid out the plan. He would not enter the town. He was a Cheyenne warrior, and his presence would bring nothing but trouble, escalating any situation into immediate violence. He would be the shadow, the overwatch from the hills. Alice, however, could walk into town unnoticed. She was just another frontier girl. "You will go in at sunrise," he instructed. "Find the sheriff's office. You said his name was Brody. See if he is an honest man. See if your father is there. Learn what is happening. Do not seek out Cain. Do not let him see you. You are the scout. You are my eyes and ears. Then you will return here." The thought of walking into that town alone terrified her, but she looked at Nokose, at his calm, resolute face, and drew strength from it. "And if my father isn't there, if the sheriff won't help, then we make a new plan," he said simply. One step at a time. That night, Alice barely slept. She was leaving one world and stepping back into another. She took off the simple doeskin tunic Mehar had made for her and put on her old tattered dress, which she had kept bundled in her pack. The rough fabric felt alien against her skin. She looked at her hands, calloused and capable, and felt a profound disconnect from the person she had been. At first light, she stood at the edge of the bluff, looking down at the awakening town. Nokose placed a hand on her shoulder. "Be the hawk, not the rabbit," he said. She nodded, took a deep breath, and began the walk down the scrub-covered hill, leaving Nokose to melt back into the landscape. She was a ghost returning from the wilderness, walking into the heart of the spider's web to find what was left of her father and to set the stage for a final, desperate reckoning. The dusty street below felt like the most dangerous place on earth. The main street of Stone Creek was a sensory assault. The smell of manure, stale beer, and frying bacon hung in the air. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoed between the false-fronted buildings. Men with hard, suspicious eyes watched her as she walked, her tattered dress and wild, sun-streaked hair marking her as an outsider. She kept her head down, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, and made a straight line for the small, unassuming building with the words "Sheriff" painted crudely above the door. She pushed the door open. Sheriff Brody was at his desk and sitting on a cot in the corner, looking gaunt but clean-shaven and sober, was her father. Abby Jedediah whispered, his voice cracking. He shot to his feet, his eyes filling with a mixture of disbelief, joy, and crushing shame. Pa was all she could manage before he crossed the room and wrapped her in his arms. She buried her face in his chest, and all the strength she had built over the past weeks dissolved into the tears of a girl who had found her father. Sheriff Brody watched the reunion with a quiet, grim satisfaction. So he said, his voice cutting through the emotional moment. "It seems the land saw fit to give you back, miss." Over the next hour, Alice told her story. She spoke of Nokose, of Meha, and the Cheyenne camp. She spoke of what she had learned, and how Nokose's family had been murdered by the same man who had ruined theirs. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the small office. Jedediah looked at his daughter, truly seeing her for the first time. This was not the frightened child he had abandoned. There was a new strength in her eyes, a confidence in the way she held herself. The frontier had not broken her. It had remade her. "Nokose is watching from the hills," Alice finished. "He said I was to be his eyes and ears." "A smart man," Brody grunted. "His showing his face in town would start a war. Kane's got a dozen hired guns who'd love an excuse to kill a Cheyenne." He leaned back in his chair. "Here's the situation. I've been investigating Kane, but he's slippery. He has bills of sale for every claim, including yours, Finch. On paper, it's all legal. My word against his won't be enough. I need proof. I need a public confession." "He'll never confess," Jedediah said bitterly. "He might," Brody said, a calculating look in his eyes, "if he's pushed, if he's made to feel like his whole operation is about to crumble." He looked at Alice. "He thinks you're dead. You, young lady, are the proof. You are the ghost he thought he'd buried." A plan began to form, a desperate gamble that hinged on a coward's courage and a girl's newfound strength. That afternoon, Jedediah Finch, looking like a man walking to his own hanging, walked into the saloon. It was crowded, noisy, and thick with smoke. Silas Kane was at a back table playing poker with 3 of his hired guns. He was a large man, well dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in the dusty town. He had a perfectly groomed beard and cold reptilian eyes. Kane Jedediah's voice was louder than he intended, causing the saloon to quiet down. Kane looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. "Finch, I heard they scraped you off the trail. Come to beg for a job, I've come to take back what's mine," Jedediah said, standing his ground. "That claim you stole from me. You forced me to sign it at gunpoint." Kane laughed, a rich, mocking sound. "You're drunk, old man. You have proof of this wild accusation. I do." Jedediah said, his voice gaining strength. "My daughter. She saw it all." Kane's smirk faltered. "Your daughter? Last I heard, she was coyote food." "A tragic story. Is that so?" A clear voice called from the saloon doors. Every head turned. Alice stood there, framed in the doorway. She was no longer the grimy girl who had arrived that morning. She had washed, and Sheriff Brody's wife had given her a simple but clean dress. She looked directly at Kane, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made him visibly recoil. The saloon was dead silent. Men knew Jedediah had come into town alone, half dead. The appearance of his very much alive daughter was like seeing an apparition. "You put a gun to my head, Mr. Kane," Alice said, her voice ringing with clarity and conviction. "You threatened to kill me. You forced my father to sign over his claim. I am the proof." Kane's face paled, then flushed with rage. His web of lies was unraveling in front of the entire town. His reputation, his power was built on intimidation and the assumption his victims disappeared. "This is a trick," he snarled, shoving the poker table aside and drawing his pistol. "She's lying." He lunged for Alice, grabbing her and pressing the gun to her temple, repeating the very crime he was being accused of. "Nobody moves." He screamed, his composure shattered, but Alice didn't scream or struggle. In that split second, Nkose's training took over. She was the hawk, not the rabbit. As Kane dragged her backward towards the door, she dropped her weight and drove her heel back into his shin, just as Nkose had taught her to do, to unbalance an enemy. Kane roared in pain, his grip momentarily loosening. It was all the opening that was needed. Sheriff Brody, who had been positioned by the bar, drew his own weapon. "Drop it." Kane, from the roof of the building, opposite the saloon, an arrow hissed through the air. It didn't strike Kane, but embedded itself with a solid thump in the doorframe inches from his head. The fletching was distinctively Cheyenne. Everyone looked up. Nkose was a silhouette against the sky, another arrow already knocked in his bow. Kane was trapped. The law in front of him, a ghost at his back, and the living proof of his crimes free from his grasp. Panic seized him. He fired his pistol wildly into the ceiling, a desperate act of a cornered animal. In the ensuing chaos, Jedediah Finch did the one thing no one expected. He charged forward, not with the rage of a fighter, but with the desperate strength of a father. He tackled Kane around the waist, driving him back against the wall. The two men crashed to the floor, Kane's pistol skittering away across the floorboards. Before Kane's men could react, Sheriff Brody had his rifle leveled. First man who moves joins Kane in a cell or in a coffin. Your choice. It was over. In the aftermath, Jedediah bruised, but resolute gave his official testimony. Alice gave hers. Several other miners, emboldened by Kane's fall, came forward with their own stories of his threats and swindles. The web was completely destroyed. That evening, as the sun set, Alice and her father stood at the edge of town, looking up at the hills. Nkose appeared from the shadows. Jedediah approached him hesitantly. "I don't have the words to," he began. "You saved her." "After what I did." Nkose looked not at Jedediah, but at Alice. "She saved herself. I only opened the door. She was the one who walked through it." He then turned his gaze to Jedediah. "You have your daughter back. You have a second chance. Do not waste it." Alice stepped forward. There was a painful understanding between her and Nkose. Their paths, which had run together for a short, intense time, were now diverging again. He could not stay, and she could not go with him. "Will you go back to Meha?" she asked. He nodded. "My fight with Kane is over. The law will have him. My vengeance is the life you now get to live. That is a better justice than my arrow would have been." He looked at the morning streaks on his face. "It is time to begin a new path." Without another word, he turned and melted back into the twilight, his form disappearing into the landscape that was his home. Alice watched him go, a profound sense of loss and gratitude washing over her. She had been left to die by a father, lost in a bottle and saved by a man drowning in grief. In the crucible of the American West, she had lost everything, only to find a strength she never knew she possessed. Her future, like the vast plains before her, was uncertain, but for the first time, it was truly her own. Alice Finch's story is a testament to the brutal realities and unlikely bonds forged in the heart of the American frontier. It reminds us that heroes don't always wear badges, and monsters often hide behind civilized clothes. Her transformation from an abandoned child into a self-reliant survivor caught between two worlds is a powerful story of resilience. It shows that sometimes the family you find in the wilderness is the one that truly saves you, and that redemption can be found even in the most broken of souls. The West was a land of endings, but for those with enough grit, it was also a land of new beginnings. If this story of survival justice and the clashing of cultures resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a true tale of the Wild West, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one, where we uncover the forgotten histories and dramatic sagas of the American frontier. Thank you for listening.